I promised you last week, and this week I am here to deliver. In today's episode, we are looking at the proposed changes to the immigration space, and boy, oh boy, are there a lot of changes. If you're someone that taps into the Accredited Employer Work Visa, then this episode is just for you. Hi everyone, welcome back to Lawlands. My name is Sanam and thank you so much for tuning in to the Employment Law Done Right podcast. Today we are talking about massive immigration changes. When I saw the changes that came in last year, I was actually quite surprised. I remember I had brought up the fact that, look, in 2 years, we are going to be dealing with a whole bunch of issues in the immigration space where people are trying to renew their visas, but they're going to have to go back home. And guess what? The situation has changed quite a lot. And starting from last month, there are major changes coming in for the immigration space in New Zealand. And at the tail end of last year is when we heard about a lot of these changes being introduced and proposed. If you haven't caught up on last week's episode was all about the employment law changes outside of the immigration space and what we're set to see for 2025. And now in this episode, we're looking at immigration changes that will impact employment law one way or another. So let's get into the key changes. But before I do, make sure that you like this podcast, that you follow the podcast, and if you're on YouTube, that you subscribe, because we are all about making sure that we spread this knowledge, this education across New Zealand so that all employers feel empowered and that they feel like they can take charge and deal with their businesses commercially. So definitely, if you're liking these episodes, give it a like, give it a follow, and let's get on with it. The reforms. Let's talk about the Accredited Employer Work Visa. Now, I go through this every time, but just to do my quick spiel, many of you know what the visa is. If you do dabble in it and you do deal with it, then you know that it is a process. Many years ago, during COVID, the height of COVID, there was this accreditation that was introduced where an employer would be able to hire migrant workers off of the back of this particular type of visa, as long as they made sure that they were checking all the boxes and doing everything that needed to be done. And once you're accredited, then you can easily bring in people that are migrant workers from overseas. The laws tightened a little bit last year in terms of, for the employee side, I would say, more than the employer side, but in turn, it affected the employers, because if you're saying to the employees, like last year's change, that if you've got a level skill such and such, and I think it was a 4 or 5, something like that, if you've got that skill level, then that means that you're going to have to pass your English language test. It adds these layers to the situation where the employer now no longer can have a larger pool of candidates to choose from. That's where it got a little bit tricky. So late last year, there was an announcement that there was going to be further reforms and further changes to the Accredited Employer Work Visa, specifically around removing median wage thresholds, reducing experience requirements to 2 years, and introducing a new seasonal visa pathway to support employers because they need to fill gaps. I mean, I think we forget that horticulture, viticulture, agriculture are huge and they really do help New Zealand thrive. But it is very hard to fill these gaps in employment, especially locally, and that's where we sometimes have to turn to migrant workers. Immigration New Zealand was very clear. They said that this will be implemented in 4 different stages over the course of 2025, starting from January. So some of this has already come into place. Now, you may be wondering, what are the actual key changes that we are meant to be looking at? The first one is that there's not going to be a median wage requirement anymore. Can I get a whoop whoop? A lot of you may be thinking, oh, Sanam, this isn't that exciting. Well. For anybody out there that has been dealing with the Accredited Employer Work Visa, and I will call it the Accredited Visa from now on because this is a lot. So the Accredited Visa, if you've been dealing with it, then you know $29.60 per hour, which is the current wage. That is a lot of money to be paying, considering the fact that the minimum wage will be, when April 1st hits, $23.50. Massive difference. A huge difference, and it can make or break a business. I might be speaking very dramatically here, but I've seen it. I've seen it time and time again. All the wage thresholds for accredited employer work visas, all the way through to the specific purpose work visa, those wage thresholds will be removed. And by removing this layer, that means that migrant workers will need to be paid at least the market rate for a role and at least the minimum wage. Now, the market rate will be different depending on the role, because if you you think about it, the rate for a veterinarian might be completely different to that of an IT engineer. So that's where we're not looking at the median anymore and taking an average across and making this number higher than it needs to be. It's more so for that industry, taking into account also the minimum wage, how much should they be paid? The median wage requirement, that will be gone, but we'll have an introduction of a new system and a new process, which is really good. So really refreshing, and we'll see how that kind of pans out. But what I wanted to do is kick off what changes we're going to start seeing as January has come in, and then as that progresses, what else are we going to look at? I'm going to throw some dates at you and some months. So let's go firstly with the accreditation process. So we've looked at the median wage threshold. That's great. It's looking great. What about accreditation processes? Well, accreditation and job check processes are here to stay. They are not going anywhere, and we know that they can be arduous. But good news was that on the 27th of January, they implemented the removal of the requirement for employers and accredited employer visa workers to complete Employment New Zealand modules. So that means that all of these modules that you needed to complete has now been removed, and it's all easy, simple. And previously with accredited employers and recognized seasonal employers, you're required to understand employment rights during the first month of work, and you need to give employees paid time off to actually do the online trainings. That will all be done and dusted. From the 27th of January, this is now fully in effect. Accredited employers and recognized seasonal employers as well will no longer have requirements in relation to online modules. They will be replaced with freely available web pages, and you can absolutely jump on there and understand your employment rights and obligations. Look, this is tricky, and what I would say here is now the ball is in your court. You are now, as an employer, the person that needs to understand these laws inside and out. So it's not a situation of it being okay that you don't understand because no one told you or anything like that. Please make sure that you understand employment rights in detail and you understand compliance, because this could really come back and bite an employer. The next change that we're going to talk about as part of the accreditation process is in March this year, the job check labor market tests are changing. Are we all breathing a sigh of relief? The current requirement for employers to engage with work and income will actually be amended to a declaration that you'll need to complete. That means that it will just be a form that you need to check off and declare that you have in good faith advertised the role using that ANSCO skill level 4 or 5 jobs, and you've done that with work and income and interviewed candidates who could have been suitable for the job. I am really cautious about this, and it's because that this can be done alongside recruitment that the employers will already be doing, and there's no need now for that whole set 21-day time frame for the engagement with work and income. But employers still remember that you need to advertise the role with work and income, and this will need to be supported with that declaration. You need to still be able to show that you have made genuine efforts to try to recruit somebody, to find somebody suitable local in New Zealand that's a citizen or resident. I will say here, 100% employers, HR managers, be careful to meet the requirements, because it's very easy for them to shift the responsibility back onto you. The risk here is that you're going to fail to meet the requirements that have been declared. Otherwise, your accreditation could be revoked or your application could be delayed. And that's the last thing that you want in these kinds of situations. Now, when it comes to construction roles, there is an interesting change happening here, and I wanted to talk about that. Again, we're shifting back to January. When we're looking at construction roles specifically, the domestic workforce threshold for employers of certain construction roles is being reduced from 35% to 15%. It means that employers of specific construction roles will now only need to ensure that 15% of their workforce is made up of New Zealanders. That's great, which means that you can hire more migrant workers now. 20% more migrant workers will make a huge difference to the people that are running their businesses that are finding it difficult to find local talent. The adjustment and the whole purpose behind this was that it was designed to address labor shortages in the construction sector. By reducing this threshold, the government is aiming to ensure that the businesses can meet their staffing needs while also continuing to provide opportunities for New Zealanders and still having that 15% there of New Zealand workers. So we'll hear more as the weeks kind of progress and as things happen, but we do definitely know that this is happening and it is something that's kicked off around January. I have done a quick search today as well to see if there was anything else that's changed, but we're all tracking along on the same information, and this is all based on that announcement last year. The next thing that is also changing around the accredited employer work visa is new earning threshold. As of March 2025, so March this year, this is another one to mark your calendars about, the accredited visa employees will need to earn at least $55,844 a year to bring children, along with meeting other criteria. This threshold has not been updated since 2019. Now, the next thing is reduced experience requirement. As of March this year, there is a drop from 3 to 2 years, which strikes a balance between the skill requirements and the need to fill critical shortages. If you've only got 2 years experience, that's the requirement now, rather than it being 3 years. Now, increasing the visa duration as well, it's something that will be a very positive change because it will allow employers to be able to keep their employees in New Zealand, and it will allow migrant workers to also stay rather than having to go back and do the application again, pay the money, and have to struggle to come back in. Now, what is this change actually going to look like? The duration of the accredited visa will increase to 3 years for a new accredited visa issued for jobs assessed as a skill level 4 or 5 on that ANSCO, that Australian and New Zealand standard classification of occupations. And that means that the visa length will change from 2 years with the option, so keep this in mind, of 1 additional year as well to 3 years. So it's changing from 2 years to 3 years now to align with the total time these workers can stay in New Zealand, their maximum continuous stay. So those people that are already on their 2-year visas, you may be wondering what's going to happen to them. They will still be able to apply for that further 1 year if they meet the requirement. And the next change that we're going to talk about, and this is kicking off from April, is around interim visa work rights. Employment law does not ever, and I'm saying this, I know this is a bold statement for anyone listening, employment law just does not match up with any other piece of legislation. Even though we want it to all fit in with commercial law or the Corporations Act or immigration legislation, but it just doesn't fit. And this is one of those situations where if an employee has their visa cancelled or something like that, or the visa's expired, then the question is, do they continue working? And employment law says that they can't just be terminated, but immigration law says that they don't have the legal rights to work in New Zealand. So what are you meant to do? I'm glad to say that from April this year, there's going to be interim work rights that will be extended to accredited visa applicants who are applying from any work visa type or from a student visa that allows them to work during term time. This will support migrants to maintain employment while their visa is processed, and it creates a lot more certainty for employers as well. It's good because it will allow you to have that interim period where the person's still on a visa. So the next thing is streamlining job checks, and this is one of the last changes that we're going to discuss. It's something that's going to come out in July this year. It's around Immigration New Zealand wanting to redesign the job check step of the accredited work visa. You know what the job check is usually like. It's not an easy system and a process to go through. You've got to test out the market to see, you get your token. Instead, now what they're proposing is that they're going to help streamline the job check for low risk employers and improve processing timeframes. And the last change that I wanted to touch on was around seasonal visa pathways. In November this year, they're saying that there will be 2 new pathways introduced for seasonal workers. One will be including a 3-year multi-entry visa for experienced workers, and one is a 7-month single entry visa for lesser skilled workers. The existing temporary seasonal pathways will remain available until then. So you'll have everything normal until later on down the track. We're looking at November with this coming in. You can see how this is going to be a huge game changer for employers out there. It will be a huge game changer for the employees trying to come in to New Zealand as well. I know I've seen it firsthand, and unless the times have changed, please feel free to let me know if they have. Reach out to me. But I remember time and time again, so many employers found it so difficult to find local talent, and they really did check the market and they tried everything possible, but it usually means that the person doesn't have enough experience or they just don't have the right skill sets, and it's not something that you can train them on the job as as well, or they don't have the right qualifications. And so getting a migrant worker will alleviate that a lot for these employers. So these could significantly impact how you recruit, how you retain your talent. So make sure that you're ready to adapt your business and the way that you're recruiting as each stage rolls out. I'm not going to lie, when last year came around, I was a bit worried about these changes, but it's starting to look up and up. And I would just recommend that you watch this space and that you make sure that you're on top of all these changes. Follow Immigration New Zealand's website. I'll leave that down below where the announcement is in the description, and then you can always have a look at that. And if you're liking these episodes, if these episodes are useful to you and you want timely updates every week, straight to your phones, straight to your laptops, whatever you listen to me on, then absolutely make sure that you give Lawlands a follow and stay tuned for more episodes in the Employment Law Done Right podcast. Well, that is it from me, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful morning, night, evening, whatever it may be. And guess what? I'll catch you in the next one, everyone.